Despite being a taboo or outright prohibited by cultures throughout history and around the world, inbreeding has had a major impact. From the royal families eager to maintain their pure divine bloodlines to isolated families, the causes were not understood, yet the consequences were known. It is perhaps helpful to start with a brief explanation as to why inbreeding is a genetic problem. Most of us have 23 pairs of chromosomes, one chromosome for each parent. On each chromosome are hundreds of thousands of genes. Like chromosomes, genes come in pairs, and again there is one from each parent. If a particular gene from one parent causes an illness or disability, and the other does not, a person has a lower chance of that disease presenting. These recessive genes can rarely cause a problem, though can still be passed on. It is thought that the average person carries around 12 of these genes that can cause a recessive condition. In children of unrelated parents, the risk of the child developing a genetic or congenital condition is around 3%. However, in inbreeding, there is a greater chance of the child receiving two recessive genes from parents who are related, and may have both received the same faulty gene. In the example of two first cousins, the chances of a congenital or genetic condition is doubled. Inbreeding has been used by royal families all over the world. Royal families would engage in inbreeding for multiple reasons. Many royals insisted that they were divinely chosen or had divine blood. Others engaged in inbreeding to maintain their family's control over land. As more and more royal families intermarried to build political alliances, more and more families shared grandparents. As far back as ancient Egypt, inbreeding for the royal families was seen as perfectly normal. Tutankhamun, perhaps the most famous pharaoh, was a product of inbreeding. He ascended to the throne when he was just 9 and died aged 19. He was plagued by illness, necrosis of the bone, and poor immune system. He likely died due to a fracture in his left thigh bone that failed to heal properly due to his weakened immune system. Tutankhamun's parents were brother and sister, whilst the young king himself took his half-sister as his wife. Buried alongside Tutankhamun were the mummified remains of two stillborn daughters. Societies including the Incan, Mayan and Hawaiian all had royal families that engaged in inbreeding. For the Incans, the divinity of the royal family meant brother and sister would marry to keep the bloodline pure, but inbreeding was perhaps most infamously seen in the royal families of Europe. The Habsburg royal family held the throne of the Holy Roman Empire from 1438 until 1740. By the 16th century, the family held lands in Spain, the Netherlands, France, Italy, Austria, and in the Balkans. The family split into two branches, the Austrian and the Spanish branches, with each ruling their respective regions. In order to maintain their control over these territories, the Habsburg family rarely married outside of itself. Uncles would marry nieces, cousins would marry cousins to strengthen and maintain the family's claim, whilst avoiding any possible disputes between the branches. This became such a norm that the inbreeding coefficient amongst the Habsburg family was far higher than could be expected. The coefficient is a way to measure how inbred an individual is, a measure often used in the breeding of pedigreed dogs. A higher coefficient means there will be traits that are more likely to appear in an individual. The range for inbreeding coefficient is on a scale from 0, meaning no inbreeding, to 1, meaning complete inbreeding. As an example, the coefficient for a child with two cousins would be 0.0625, whilst the child of a full brother and sister would have a coefficient of 0.25. The most infamous example of the Habsburg royal family was King Charles II of Spain. He had an inbreeding coefficient of 0.25, yet his mother and father were not brother and sister, rather they were uncle and niece. There can be high levels of inbreeding where there is regular intermarriage and breeding in the family. This can be best seen, if somewhat confusingly, in the Habsburg family tree. His parents too were inbred, meaning shared genes and recessive conditions were passed to Charles. He was by all accounts severely disabled. His most prominent feature was his jaw, which became known as the Habsburg jaw. Like many of his relatives, he had a protruding jaw, as well as a large tongue. It was said that Charles was unable to speak until he was 4 and swallowed his food whole. As a child, he contracted a number of illnesses, including measles, rubella, and smallpox. It is speculated that he could have suffered with hormone deficiency and kidney failure. He struggled to walk, he struggled to write, and he suffered with depression. Charles was also likely impotent, never producing an heir, and he earned the nickname Charles the Hexed on account of his many conditions and illnesses. This in turn led to conflict on his death as to who would inherit his lands, and his autopsy described him in rather unkind terms, stating, quote, "His heart was the size of a peppercorn, his lungs corroded, his intestines were rotten and gangrenous. He had a single testicle as black as coal, and his head was full of water." The head full of water could indicate that he suffered from hydrocephalus. This is a buildup of spinal fluid in the brain, and could have been linked to his childhood case of measles. Yet he was noted for his kindness towards foreign dignitaries, and for his love of the outdoors, notably spending much of his time hunting. Another notable example in royalty is that of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. The two were first cousins. Some of their children were born with the genetic condition hemophilia. This is a condition that makes it harder for the blood to clot, putting a person at risk of blood loss from an injury that would otherwise be non-fatal. The intermarriage amongst the royal families of Europe was hoped to ensure a lasting peace, a familial tie between the royal houses. But as a result, the gene responsible for hemophilia was spread among the royal families of Europe. At the start of the First World War, the King of Britain, the Kaiser of Germany, and the Tsar of Russia were all cousins, with King George and Tsar Nicholas bearing a striking resemblance. However, these ties proved to be insufficient in stopping the First World War, and yet the consequences of royal inbreeding did have a major impact on the course of the war and in Russian history. The heir to the Russian throne, Alexei Romanov, was a hemophiliac. Both Tsar Nicholas and Tsarina Alexandra shared Queen Victoria as a common ancestor. This resulted in Alexei being a sickly child and one that had to be protected at all costs. Tsar Nicholas and Alexandra tried everything. Eventually, one of the many healers called to cure Alexei was the mad monk Rasputin. His influence over the Romanov family was one of the factors in their downfall, as it alienated both the Russian nobility and the Russian people. The inbreeding of royalty has even become a staple of popular culture. The Song of Ice and Fire series has the royal Tigerian family engage in inbreeding, not only for political gain, but also for the genetic powers of dragon riding. Another striking example of inbreeding is that of the Blue people of Kentucky, members of the Fugate family. In 1820, by chance, two unrelated carriers of a gene that caused the condition methemoglobinemia. The word is on screen now. This is a blood disorder. Because the couple were carriers of this gene, it resulted in their children being born with blue skin. The family had 9 children, 4 of whom displayed blue skin. The area in which they lived was Knott County, known for its impassable and difficult terrain. Outsiders were rarely welcomed, and over time, the Fugate family married Fugate, passing down the shared recessive gene and the proliferation of blue-skinned people. It was not initially known what the cause was of the blue skin. Some people believed it was some form of curse from the devil, or some unknown racial trait. The blue skin only cemented the isolation of the family and the intermarriages. It would not be until the 1960s that a man by the name of Madison Caywin and a nurse named Ruth Pendergrass shone a light on the cause of the condition. By this point, other families than just the Fugates had people with blue skin. The pair were able to locate a few people with blue skin, and they agreed to undergo tests. It was eventually found that those with blue skin had an abundance of methemoglobin. There was not enough to cause any physical illness, instead only turning the skin blue and the blood a deep brown. Most countries today prohibit incest, notably between brother and sister, parent and child, or aunt and nephew. Few countries prohibit inbreeding between first cousins. In some countries, incestuous relationships between same-sex couples are prohibited, whilst opposite-sex couples are allowed. In others, the inverse is true. Inbreeding between first cousins does remain in some countries. In 30 of the American states it is prohibited, so too it is in China and some states in India. There is a greater risk of genetic disorders amongst the children of two first cousins when compared to the children of unrelated parents. For the children of first cousins, there is between a 4 and 6% chance of a recessive gene condition, whilst for unrelated there is a 3% chance of such conditions. Cousin marriages tend to be more common in lower socio-economic areas, or as a means to avoid paying dowries. In Pakistan, instances of first cousin marriage are quite high, where religious, tribal and caste expectations combine to often pressure such relationships. Genetic disorders are known to be rising, with efforts made to educate families about the dangers of inbreeding. Two of the most famous examples of inbreeding today are the Whitakers in America and the Colt family in Australia. Inbreeding remains one of the more disturbing aspects of many royal family trees, and as our understanding of genetics has improved, inbreeding has become less prevalent. The disturbing cases of the Habsburgs and the examples seen in societies around the world will remain as a grim warning as to the dangers and consequences of inbreeding.